Hello, this is Roger Lamb in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm really excited to be with you and excited to be with all the students in the School of Missions around the world. I've been asked to share my story in terms of how we came in contact with the campus evangelism movement, etc. And I'd like to share some things with you, and you'd probably rather look at some pictures than me. So the truth is, my story is really in his story, and that's what makes history. When we can finally see our story in God's story, it just makes sense and makes everything make sense. My story starts way back in the Restoration movement. This is my great-grandfather, Isaac G. Lamb, Church of Christ preacher in Illinois from the 1890s to the 1920s. And as fate would have it, I was able to get his religious library that he had. I thought you would be interested in this young minister's training school. In his young minister's training school that he went to in 1896 for 10 weeks, studying Greek, Latin, history, homiletics, elocution, logic, exegesis, and public speaking. So think about that if you tend to complain about the expectations of these teachers. My family grew up in Colorado, and that's where I spent the first several years of my life. And then my dad was in the Air Force, so we transferred to Germany. That's where I went to high school, graduated. I was the only teen in my church in high school. And I just lived for the summers when I could go to this Christian camp for 2 weeks in Switzerland. Changed my worldview entirely. I got to actually preach my first sermon as a senior. I had prepared everything. I just knew it was going to take 45 minutes. I was done in 15 minutes, probably the last time for me till today. Then I went to Harding College. It was a Christian college affiliated with Churches of Christ in Searcy, Arkansas. I came from Germany. Marcia came from Indiana. We married our senior year. Our first date was to the World Missions Conference held at Harding that year. And then we spent 4 summers together on door knocking campaigns, studying the Bible with people, mostly in the Northeast US. My last 2 years in college, I preached at the Possum Grape Church of Christ. That was a fantastic experience. Then in 1966, during that time, I caught hold and caught wind of this campus evangelism movement that was rustling among the Churches of Christ. So I scraped together some pennies and went to this seminar in Dallas, Texas. It was about reviving campus ministry in the US, inspired actually by Campus Crusade for Christ. And Bill Bright actually was one of the speakers at this event. The focus was on evangelism. Most of the people in this group really wanted to build their campus ministries, but had never studied the Bible with anyone. The Crossroads Church was born from this effort. Chuck Lucas was one of the song leaders and organizers of these events. The Soul Talk idea came out of this campus evangelism movement. Then after I graduated, Marcia and I moved to Houston, Texas, where I became a youth minister in a large church, 1,000 members, 200 teens. I had no training, had no idea what to do. But I did take them on mission teams each summer to go to areas where the Churches of Christ were weak and to work in vacation Bible schools, etc. I was talking to the preacher one day, I'll never forget this, very highly respected man. And I said, why aren't we baptizing more people? He said, you have to understand, our mission is to keep the saved saved. I knew right then that wasn't for me. My goal was to change the world through the gospel. I didn't know how, but I knew it should be done. So as fate would have it, as God would have it in his story, I was given this opportunity to go to this little church of 60 people in a little town in Charleston, Illinois, 10,000 students, 10,000 people in the town, a new building on the edge of campus. Literally, the largest freshman dorm was out the back of the building. And then when we got there, I found out that my great grandfather had been the minister for this church from 1894 to 1898, and that he had baptized Marcia's grandfather. I thought, okay, this is God's story. I don't know where it's going, but this is amazing. The church there in Charleston grew from 60 to 120 in 3 years. Many, many students became Christians, but also marrieds and singles and others. We were searching for how to build a New Testament church. I went to evangelism conferences, soul winning workshops, bus evangelism workshops, campus evangelism workshops. I was trying to figure out, how do you build a New Testament church? My marriage was a mess. I was not happy in the ministry. I was ready to leave it, but I wanted to take care of all these students that had come. So I figured the answer was to get a campus minister. So I raised the money and went looking for a campus minister. I couldn't find one until I remembered the Crossroads bulletins from the Crossroads Church of Christ in Gainesville, Florida. So I called up the church. I think I talked to Sam Lang and said, look, I have the money. Do you have some people you train? And they sent us Tom Brown, who came and interviewed. We loved him, but he went on to Boulder to interview and was hired in Boulder, Colorado. Then Kip McKean came, fell in love with him, and hired him that summer. And he came up in September 76, before he and Elena got married in December, actually. This was amazing. But one of the best things that Kip did was he challenged me to go to the Florida Evangelism Seminar. So I went down to the 1976 seminar, and it blew me away. I saw the New Testament church I'd been hearing about my whole life. I saw the total commitment to Jesus, the multiracial, multicultural, multi-generational church. I saw them loving, actually hugging. I saw evangelism was normal, not just a side program of the church. The goal was to plant a ministry on every campus of the U.S. Wow, what an amazing goal. God just blessed that effort. Our own personal discipleship decisions, Marcia and I both had to realize we were not totally committed to Jesus. That's why we were unhappy in the ministry, unhappy in the marriage. And we made that change in front of the church and challenged them to do the same. Marty Fuqua was baptized that fall and sent out 10 months later to start a campus ministry at Northern Illinois University in 1977. Chris Fuqua became a Christian there, as did Mark and Connie Mancini, John and Nancy Mannell, Steve Saindon, many, many more who are now leaders in the Chicago Church, Champaign Church, and others throughout the Midwest and other places in America. In 1979, we actually had 151 baptisms in that little tiny church. Our building only held about 300 people. It was the work of God. Well, God's blessings, there were 10 campus ministries now throughout the Midwest, led by Crossroads trained ministers. And so we had the campus, or the Midwest Evangelism Seminar, to help unify and to help celebrate and help move this momentum forward in the Midwest. Those seminars grew to be 4,000 people every year. Then in 1979, as God's story would have it, God moved the McKeans to Boston, the Lexington Church of Christ, this little group that were challenged to be totally committed disciples of Jesus. This group becomes the Boston Church of Christ. And of course, there's the picture of Bob and Pat Gimple, Kim Evans, and that fuzzy-haired Doug Arthur guy. It's amazing because that was the church that they grew up in for many years. And Bob was an elder in. We were happy about that because obviously the potential of the 300,000 college students in the Boston area, what in the world, how could God use KIPP to reach those? Meanwhile, in the Midwest, the Chicago church became the first church planting in our movement in 1982. In 1983, we led a group to Champaign, Illinois, at the University of Illinois to plant a church with Walter and Kim Evans. That was amazing. And then in 1985 to 88, we moved up. We were invited to move to Chicago, and I co-led with Marty Fuqua. God's story blessed the church from 650 to 1,500 in attendance. And we developed the first regional evangelization plan for saturation of an area. So you can see from just a little seed in Charleston, Illinois, and a little bit of faith, what God can do and how he directs our steps. My question is, what is your story in his story? Thank you very much.